From rails to rockets, 800 days around the world, part 4. I'm going to see it for myself, a wonderful imaginary venture, and first time in the life. I have closed my eyes and venturing into a tour of the world, everything imaginary. This is a journey of the mind, body, and soul. 100-day pilgrimage across continents, oceans, cultures, and frontiers of science and technology. Author Shri
Rajeev Shantaram Thatte.
Day 52, Toronto. Unity in diversity. I arrived in Toronto, Canada's largest city, where over 200 cultures live side by side in an orchestra of languages, aromas, and identities. At CN Tower, I stood on the glass above the skyline, dizzy but amazed. The city stretched wide and calm below. A boat glided across Lake Ontario. I remembered how deeply Canada is tied to its waters. Strolling through Kensington Market, I felt like I was walking the world. Jamaican bakeries, Vietnamese pho shops, Ethiopian cafes, and Ukrainian grocers. No boundaries, just flavors. Lunch was at St. Lawrence Market, where I tried the classic pea-meal bacon sandwich and spoke with a cheerful butcher named Raj. My grandfather came from Punjab. He said, "Now my son plays hockey. That's Canada." In the afternoon, I visited the Royal Ontario Museum, filled with indigenous art, dinosaur bones, and Inuit carvings that told stories deeper than words. At sunset, I joined a crowd watching street performers at Harbourfront. A jazz band played as children danced and bubbles floated skyward. Day 52 showed me that true strength is not in sameness but in harmony. Day 53, Quebec City. The soul of old Canada flying east. I landed in Quebec City, where cobbled streets and French whispers brought me back centuries. It's the only walled city north of Mexico, and every stone here remembers a different world. At Chateau Frontenac, I sipped coffee as snowflakes fell. The street, Lawrence River flowed below like time itself, wide, patient, enduring. I wandered through old Quebec, its cathedrals and plazas touched with romance. In Place Royal, buskers sang folk songs while tourists stood entranced. Lunch was a steaming ball of tortilla paired with maple syrup tea. A local couple invited me to their table, sharing stories in French and English. "We argue over language," said the woman with a smile, "but never about love." Later, I visited the plains of Abraham, where battles once raged between France and Britain. Snow now covered the fields, quiet, peaceful. History rests here, but never sleeps. The evening brought warm lights in frosted windows. Inside, strangers became friends over music, wine, and laughter. Day 53 reminded me that old doesn't mean forgotten, it means cherished. Day 54, Vancouver, where mountains meet the sea flying west across the vast Canadian sky. I arrived in Vancouver, where nature and city dance in balance. The morning began at Stanley Park, where I biked the seawall under tall pines and beside gentle waves. Totem poles stood in silent strength, carved by the First Nations, reminding visitors whose land this truly is. Downtown, glass towers shimmered beside forests. I explored Granville Island, filled with artists, artisans, and fresh market smells. A flautist played while gulls circled above. Lunch was Pacific salmon and sushi, fitting for a port city where Asia meets America. A young barista told me, "We can ski in the morning and kayak in the afternoon." Where else can you do that? In the afternoon, I rode a gondola up Grouse Mountain. Below, the city glowed like embers. Above, the world was snow and silence. Evening brought a walk through Gastown, where cobblestones clicked and the old steam clock whistled its tune. Locals and newcomers alike filled cozy pubs and cafes, warm against the coastal chill. Day 54 was a prayer of gratitude whispered to earth, water, and sky. Vancouver reminded me that civilization need not conquer nature, it can coexist. Day 55, Tokyo, Japan. Where the future bows to the past landing in Tokyo, I stepped into a world of contrasts, where samurai spirits walk beside robots, and silence lives in the middle of noise. My morning began in Asakusa, at the Sensoji temple. Lanterns swayed, incense rose like memory, and visitors bowed quietly. I drew a fortune from an ancient box and tied it to a rack beside hundreds of others. Hope shared is hope multiplied. By mid-morning, I was whisked by the Shinkansen bullet train to Akihabara, Tokyo's electric heart. Neon signs blinked in kanji, anime characters danced on walls, and arcades pulsed with life. I played a rhythm game beside a boy who barely looked up but smiled when he beat me. Lunch was a steaming bowl of ramen in a tiny alley shop. The chef didn't speak English, but the food translated perfectly. In the afternoon, I visited Shibuya Crossing, the busiest pedestrian crossing in the world. Hundreds flowed through in perfect chaos, like water learning choreography. As evening fell, I climbed Tokyo Skytree. The city below glowed like circuitry. I stood in silence, overwhelmed by beauty and balance. Day 55 reminded me that Japan doesn't just live in the future, it remembers the soul of the past. Day 56, Kyoto, the city of 1,000 temples, a quiet morning train ride brought me to Kyoto, the cultural soul of Japan. Here, time slowed to the pace of footsteps on stone. I walked the philosopher's path, cherry blossoms swirling like dreams in the breeze. At Ginkakuji, the silver pavilion, monks tended raked gravel gardens with patient devotion, turning sand into serenity. I took part in a tea ceremony at a centuries-old house. Every movement was deliberate, every sound respected, the pouring of water, the whisking of matcha, the placing of a cup. A moment became a meditation. Lunch was a kaseki meal. Small, seasonal, perfect. Each dish like a poem, delicate, fleeting, profound. In the afternoon, I visited the golden halls of Kinkakuji, reflected in a still pond, and then the 1,000 vermilion gates of Fushimi Inari Shrine stretching up the mountainside. I walked among them like a pilgrim, hearing only birds, breeze, and breath. Evening meant Jain, where geishas glided through lantern-lit alleys. and the streets whispered of old poetry and faded love. Day 56 was a lesson in quiet power. Kyoto reminded me that peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from stillness within. Day 57, Seoul, South Korea. Resilience in rhythm, I flew to Seoul, a city of ancient palaces and high-speed everything. Here, pop stars reign, but temples still breathe. The day began at Gyeongbokgung Palace, where guards in traditional dress changed post with precision. I explored its quiet courtyards, imagining the whispers of kings and queens beneath its wooden eaves. Nearby, I wandered through Bukcho Hanok village, where old-style homes clung to hillsides with dignity. Locals sold crafts, and a young girl showed me how to write my name in Hangul script. Lunch was bibimbap and kimchi, bold and fiery. A college student beside me said, Korea was rebuilt from ruins. That's why we move fast. We remember stillness too well. In the afternoon, I visited the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, the razor-thin divide between North and South Korea. Through binoculars, I glimpsed the mysterious North. It felt like staring at a wound the world forgot to heal. Evening in Hongdae brought a different Korea. Music, dance battles, food stalls, and laughter. A boy group performed beneath fairy lights. Girls screamed. Boys filmed. A grandmother clapped. Day 57 reminded me that resilience can sing, dance, and wear makeup and still be fierce. Day 58, Beijing, the heart of the dragon. I arrived in Beijing, the capital of China and the former seat of emperors, a city where past and present stand face to face, neither yielding. I started the day at Tiananmen Square, the largest public square in the world. It was early, and the air carried both solemnity and pride. Nearby stood the mausoleum of Mao, silent and formidable. Walking across to the Forbidden City, I passed under the iconic portrait of Chairman Mao. Inside, I entered a world of red walls and golden roofs. Courtyards stretched endlessly, each a layer of history, each echoing the footsteps of emperors and eunuchs, concubines and rebels. Lunch was Peking duck, sliced by a master chef and wrapped in thin pancakes with scallions and sauce. Crisp, rich, unforgettable. In the afternoon, I ventured to the Temple of Heaven, where elders practiced their chi beneath cypress trees. The temple itself, circular, majestic, blue-roofed, radiated harmony with the cosmos. Evening brought me to a Beijing opera performance. High-pitched, colorful, intricate. I didn't understand every word, but I felt the weight of every note. Day 58 showed me that power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sits in silence behind vermilion gates. Day 59. The Great Wall and the Terracotta Army, two wonders. Two epochs at dawn, I headed north to Mutianyu, a quieter section of the Great Wall. I climbed steep stone steps, stood atop the wall, and gazed across green mountains veiled in mist. The wall wound endlessly, like a dragon frozen in stone, proud, ancient, defiant. Later, I flew to Elevenn, one of the oldest cities in China and starting point of the Silk Road. There, I visited the astonishing Terracotta Army, thousands of life-sized warriors buried with the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, to guard him in the afterlife. No two faces were alike. I stared into the gaze of a soldier who had not blinked in 2000 years. Dinner was hand-pulled noodles in the Muslim quarter, full of cumin, chili, and flavor. The streets bustled with calligraphy, spices, and history. Day 59 was a journey through time, from the wall that defended a nation to the clay soldiers who still stand guard. Day 60, Shanghai. China's shining tomorrow, I arrived in Shanghai, where East meets West in the shape of neon, steel, and soaring ambition. I started with a walk along the Bund, watching the colonial buildings stand shoulder to shoulder across from the futuristic skyline of Pudong, where the Oriental Pearl Tower and Shanghai Tower rose like silver giants. A river of time flowed between them. At Vayu Garden, I slipped into a pocket of old Shanghai. Rockeries, koi ponds, curved roofs. Tea was served in silence, and the scent of jasmine lingered. Lunch was exayo long bao, soup dumplings that burst with flavor. Each bite was a lesson in craftsmanship. In the afternoon, I visited the Shanghai Museum, rich in calligraphy, bronze, jade, and ceramics. In a single room, I saw 5,000 years of Chinese evolution. As night fell, I took a river cruise and watched the skyline erupt in color. Lasers danced. Buildings glowed. China smiled. Day 60 was about contrasts, ancient elegance, and modern ambition in perfect collision. Day 61, Chengdu, the land of pandas and poetry, flying southwest to Chengdu, I entered a more relaxed, poetic side of China. Morning brought a visit to the Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding. I watched baby pandas tumble down hills, eat bamboo, and fall asleep mid-chew. Peace in fur form. Later, I sat by the Jinli ancient street, sipping tea at a riverside tea house while locals played mahjong. The rhythm of tiles was oddly musical. Lunch was the famous Chengdu hot pot. Spicy, numbing, addictive. A local warned me about the heat. He wasn't joking. In the afternoon, I visited the thatched cottage of Du Fu, the Tang Dynasty poet. His verses, carved in stone, still felt alive. His poems of famine, friendship, and fleeting life were timeless. Evening brought me to a Sichuan opera face-changing performance. Masks flipped in a blink, flames danced from sleeves, and the crowd gasped in awe. Day 61 was gentle, lyrical, and deeply human, reminding me that even in a vast empire, small moments carry the greatest weight. Day 62, Guilin and the Li River. China's painted dream, I flew to Guilin, a place where earth becomes art. Morning light revealed the cursed mountains, rising like stone teeth from mist-covered fields. I boarded a boat and sailed down the Li River, past water buffalo, fishermen, bamboo groves, and peaks mirrored in still waters. It felt like floating through a scroll painting. Lunch was riverside, fresh fish, rice wine, and lotus root salad. In the afternoon, I explored the reed flute cave, where stalactites lit in rainbow hues created a dreamscape of color and echo. As evening arrived, I watched the Impression Liu Sanjie performance on the river choreographed by Zhang Yima, with hundreds of dancers performing on boats against the backdrop of real mountains. Day 62 was ethereal, China as myth and music, where nature itself tells the story. Day 63, Hanoi, Vietnam. Echoes of the Dragon, I arrived in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam, where scooters buzz like bees and history lingers in lakes and shadows. My first stop was the Old Quarter, a labyrinth of narrow streets named after trades: Tin Street, Paper Street, Silk Street. Vendors sold everything from dragon fruit to dragon statues. I sipped a coffee, rich and strange, in a cafe once used by revolutionaries. At Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum, I stood in silence beside locals paying homage to Uncle Ho. His preserved body lay in still dignity beneath the red flag. Lunch was pho by the roadside, the broth brewed for hours, fragrant with star anise and coriander. In the afternoon, I walked around Hon Kim Lake, where lovers strolled, students laughed, and old men played chess under banyan trees. I visited NGOC Sun Temple, rising from the water on a red bridge like a memory. Evening brought me to a water puppet show where dragons, farmers, and fairies danced on a pool. An art form as old as the rice fields. Day 63 felt like reading a faded love letter, half history, half poetry. Day 64, Luang Prabang. Laos, the quiet kingdom, a short flight brought me to Luang Prabang, nestled in the hills of Laos. Here, the Mekong whispers, and monks walk barefoot at dawn. I woke before sunrise to witness the almsgiving ritual. Locals knelt with sticky rice as lines of saffron-robed monks passed in silence. It was humbling, sacred simplicity. I visited Wat Zieng Thong, a glittering temple with mosaics that shimmered like jewels. Nearby, the Royal Palace Museum told stories of kings who rode elephants and prayed to Buddha. Lunch was lab, a spicy minced meat salad, and tam makhung, papaya salad, bright and fiery. In the afternoon, I climbed Mount Fauzi. At the top, I watched the sun fall over the Mekong, painting the hills in honey and gold. As night fell, I wandered the Luang Prabang night market. Woven scarves, handmade journals, silver jewelry. A girl sold me a bracelet and whispered, "For peace." Day 64 was quite magic, a place where time sits down and listens. Day 65, Chiang Mai, Thailand. Temples and tigers crossing into northern Thailand, I arrived in Chiang Mai, where jungle meets monastery. My day began at Wat Phra, that Do Suthep, perched on a hill. I climbed 309 steps guarded by serpent railings and reached the golden stupa shimmering in the sun. Bells rang, monks chanted, and incense sweetened the air. Back in town, I joined a Thai cooking class. We made green curry, mango sticky rice, and tom yum soup. The instructor said, Thai food is balance. Sweet, sour, salty, spicy, like life. In the afternoon, I visited an ethical elephant sanctuary. I fed sugarcane to a rescued elephant named Mali. She nudged me gently with her trunk like a thank you. Evening brought the Chiang Mai night bazaar, alive with lights, art, and street music. I ate fried banana, drank lemongrass tea, and got a foot massage from an old woman with kind eyes. Day 65 was rich with spirit and soul, where nature, compassion, and flavor coexisted like lifelong friends. Day 66, Bangkok. City of angels and contrasts. Arriving in Bangkok, I found a city pulsing with contradictions. Golden temples beside glass towers, monks with smartphones, and long-tail boats racing under expressways. I began at Wat Pho, where the giant reclining Buddha smiled gently. At Wat Arun, the Temple of Dawn, I climbed steep stairs and touched centuries. Lunch was spicy pad thai on the sidewalk, served by a vendor who claimed he once cooked for royalty. Next, I visited the Grand Palace, a dazzling maze of gold, emeralds, and mythology. Inside the temple of the Emerald Buddha, silence reigned. In the afternoon, I took a boat ride through the Chao Phraya River and its hidden canals, stilt houses, floating markets, monks waving from verandas. Evening was on Khao San Road, backpacker heaven. Street music, fried scorpions, lanterns, tattoos, and stories from every continent, all in 1 kilometer. Day 66 was a carnival of contradictions, chaotic and divine, noisy and noble. Day 67, Siem Reap, Cambodia. Stones that remember flying east. I landed in Siem Reap, gateway to one of humanity's greatest wonders. At dawn, I stood before Angkor, what as the sun rose behind its towers, reflected in the lotus-filled moat. A moment of myth made real. I spent the day exploring the Angkor Archaeological Park, the haunting faces of Bayo, the jungle-clutched walls of Ta Prohm, and the serene symmetry of Angkor Thom. Stones whispered of gods, kings, and forgotten empires. Lunch was amok tray, fish curry steamed in banana leaves, and loklak, stir-fried beef with lime pepper sauce. In the evening, I joined a local Enduran Apsara dance performance, graceful hands, regal postures, ancient rhythm. Day 67 was humbling, ruins still standing, not despite time, but because of it. Day 68, Kolkata, India. The intellectual heartbeat, we touched down in Kolkata, once the jewel of British India, and now a city of poets, politics, and paradox. The day began at Victoria Memorial, gleaming white under monsoon skies, a relic of empire turned into a museum of resistance. In the adjacent Maidan, cricket games blossomed like flowers. At Kali Ghat temple, devotees prayed to the fierce goddess Kali. The smell of incense, marigolds, and sweat filled the narrow lanes. Lunch was shorshe ilish, hilsa fish in mustard sauce, served on a banana leaf. Later, I walked down College Street, where second-hand books spilled onto the pavement, and chai came in earthen cups. Evening found me riding a tram past colonial facades, under banyans, into memory. Rabindranath Tagore's verses seemed to hang in the air. Day 68 was a conversation between past and present, unhurried and deeply thoughtful. Day 69, Varanasi. The sacred flow of life and death. Next stop was Varanasi, the oldest living city in the world, where pilgrims come to wash away lifetimes. At dawn, I rowed a boat on the Ganges River, watching the ghats come alive, priests chanting, pilgrims bathing, bodies burning. It was beautiful and brutal. I visited Kashi Vishwanath Temple, crowded with believers, bells, and flowers. The fragrance of sandalwood mixed with the smoke of cremation pyres. Lunch was simple khichdi and lassi in a quiet cafe run by monks. In the evening, I witnessed the Ganga Aarti at the Shashwamedh Ghat. Fire, song, and saffron-robed priests waving lamps to the river as the crowd joined in chants that echoed to the stars. Day 69 felt like touching eternity, where time dissolves into devotion. Day 70, Rishikesh, India. The yoga capital, I journeyed north to the foothills of the Himalayas, Rishikesh, the town where the Beatles once meditated and where the Ganges is still pure. Morning began with Sunrise Yoga on the riverbank, led by a calm-faced yogi who spoke in mantras. I visited Parmarth Niketan Ashram, where I joined in collective chanting and learned that stillness is a journey too. Lunch was a Sattvic thali, wholesome, vegetarian, made without garlic or onion, said to aid meditation. In the afternoon, I crossed the Lakshman Jhula suspension bridge, fed cows, and visited the ruins of the Beatles' ashram, now overgrown with graffiti and memories. As the sun set, I released a diya, lamp, into the Ganga, whispering a prayer for the world. Day 70 was deeply personal, the kind of day that leaves a mark on your soul. Day 71, Kathmandu, Nepal. Between earth and sky crossing the border into Nepal, I landed in Kathmandu, a city of prayer wheels and dust, chaos and calm. I began at Swayambhunath Stupa, Monkey Temple, where eyes painted on the stupa seemed to see everything. Prayer flags fluttered in the breeze, and monkeys stole offerings. At Pashuptinath, I witnessed open-air cremations beside the sacred Bagmati River. The cycle of life was everywhere. Lunch was momo dumplings and thukpa noodle soup, rich and comforting. In the afternoon, I walked the Darbar Square, still showing scars from the 2015 earthquake, yet resilient with life. Day 71 was humbling, where belief is not a doctrine but breath itself. Day 72, Thimphu, Bhutan. Gross national happiness, our plane spiraled into Paro, Bhutan, one of the most dramatic landings on Earth. Then a winding drive took us to Thimphu, the peaceful capital. The city has no traffic lights, just a white-gloved officer at a roundabout. Here, happiness is a state policy. I visited the Buddha Dodonma, a giant seated Buddha overlooking the valley. Inside, 125,000 smaller Buddha were nestled in his heart. Lunch was imadachi, chilies and cheese, with red rice, hot and earthy. I explored the Tashicho Dzong, the seat of the government and monastic body. Monks in crimson robes walked past parliamentarians in Gho and Kira. Evening brought me to a quiet hilltop to reflect, breathing mountain air and stillness. Day 72 felt like a sanctuary, the kind the soul recognizes instantly.